Welcome to this short demonstration of Jenkins X version 3. So let's show you how to install it. If you click on the docs and click on the version 3 website and the getting started guide, the first thing to do is pick a Git repository based on the kind of cluster you want to create, whether it's Google, Amazon, or Minikube. Right now we hope to have Azure fairly soon and a bunch of other example quick starts. I'll click on the GKE one. We're going to start off using GKE on Google Cloud with Terraform and Vault. So we click on this URL, which opens a little wizard on github.com, and we're going to create a brand new Git repository for our cluster. We'll call it Terraform Demo 3. I'll make it a private repository, just in case I accidentally check in any secrets or anything, and I'll create the repository. So now we've got a new Git repository on GitHub. I'll talk about the source code inside this Git repository a little bit later, but let's get going on the demo. Now we need to git clone the repository. So I'm going to git clone this new repository, and then cd into JX3 Terraform Demo 3. So here's the cloned stuff. And now we read the docs on how to create your infrastructure, which in this case is using Terraform. I've already installed the Terraform binary, so I'm going to create the environment variable for which Google project I wish to create this inside, and then we're going to run the Terraform. I'm going to configure the project, which is going to modify the Terraform file to specify the project ID, and now we're going to run the apply. This is going to download all the various Terraform modules, initialize and verify the Terraform stuff. We then get a chance to approve at the end. So now we enter yes to continue to create the Kubernetes cluster and buckets and service accounts and so forth. Click yes. And now Terraform is going to set up all the infrastructure for us. Okay, we've created the cluster now. If I do kubectl get namespaces, I'll see there's no JX namespace yet. There's a cert manager namespace and a default and kube system and stuff. So we've got an empty Kubernetes cluster. Now what we need to do is commit any change files. Do git status. We'll see that we've modified the Terraform file. If we do a git status, git diff, we'll see we've added the project ID. So we're going to do a git commit. Git commit -n. Git push. Okay, and now we're going to run the operator, the Git operator, which is going to install Jenkins X into this cluster. So I type JX admin operator. It's going to ask me for my GitHub username and token to run the pipeline, and all the pipelines, all the CI/CD pipelines. I'm going to use my personal username. I'm going to copy in a token I've created already. You can click on this URL here to create a new token. Click that. Now it's going to refresh the Helm, the locally queried Helm chart repositories. It's going to install the JX Git operator chart. You see that line there? It's going to install the JX Git operator. This is basically the line that it's just executed. It's running Helm version 3.2.4. It's installing a chart. It's passing in the URL of my Git repository, my username, my token into the JX namespace, and that's the chart name. So it's going to install that chart. The chart contains the Git operator, which is a thing that installs Jenkins X in a job inside the Kubernetes cluster. So it looks like this is all running on my laptop, but really everything's running in a pod inside Kubernetes from now on. So this is the pod for the Git operator that's starting. It's ready. It's running. That's great. Now the Git operator is going to create a job to install Jenkins X, this JX boot job here. The job has started. A pod should start soonish, and then the whole installation process will continue. So it's nice and simple. You create the Git repository. You configure it with your cluster-specific details. You commit the changes, then you just run JX admin operator. So it's one simple command from a Git repository. While that's running, we can open Octant. Let's open Octant. There we go. I just ran Octant in a shell. And here's the Octant front end where we can now look at what's happening in the cluster. So it's looking at the JX namespace. And if I look at the pods, we'll see these are all the running pods. So we've got the Git operator running, and the Git operator is a thing that periodically polls the Git repository to look for changes. It's seen a change, so now it's ran this JX boot pod, and that pod's now running. And we can see in the console, here's the output of the installation job. So this is going to take a few minutes to run, and fairly soon we should see some new pods appear. Okay, boot's finished. We've now got a Jenkins X install complete. If I look inside the repositories tab, we'll see we just have a single repository, which is the repository that contains the Git repository configuration for the Terraform. So that's the Terraform file. And it's got the Helm file, which defines all the chats we're deploying. So there's Kubernetes external secrets. There's Nginx, there's Tecton, there's Lighthouse, Nexus, Chat Museum, and so forth. Vault operator, and something called push away. So we've got a definition of all the charts to install in this Helm file, and we've got the requirements file, which defines things like what's the GCP project, what's the name of the vault, what namespace to use, and so forth. Right, so let's try use Jenkins X. If I look in the pipelines tab, we'll see we've run a pipeline on the cluster repository to set up all the namespaces and the Jenkins X deployments and so forth. You'll see here's all the apps we've installed so far in the JX namespace. So we've got the Git operator, build and role controller, Foghorn controller and keeper are part of Lighthouse, and webhooks is too. Nexus and Tecton. Okay, right, so let's keep this open on the pipelines tab. Let's create a brand new quick start. So with Jenkins X3, we use the project command. So project quick start. This will create a new project quick start. I've not downloaded the most recent project plugin, so it's just downloading that for me. Once it's done that, it won't ask you again for the latest version. Now it's asking me which kind of quick start do I want to do, and I'm going to use a node quick start. I'm going to use my Git user. I'm going to use that, my personal organization, to create this. Think of a really good project name. Let's call it Awesome Node. Initialize the Git repository and git commit the quick start source code. I'm going to use the default build pack. And we're going to use a JavaScript build pack in the library. It's now going to create a Git repository on GitHub. And here's the Git repository. Let me open that in a new terminal, a new browser. So here's the Git repository. If you've seen the Jenkins X demonstration before, this all probably looks very similar. It's a very simple Node.js application with a very lovely home page that just says Jenkins X. What's interesting about Jenkins X3 is we've now created a pull request on the cluster repository. And if I open that pull request, I'll show you what it looks like. So this is the pull request that's been generated to import this new quick start. And if you look at the files that have been changed, we'll see we're keeping this dependency matrix, which is a little bit of metadata that keeps track of all the different dependencies of a repository that helps us understand the flow of versions across repositories. And we've created this new file here. Let's view that file. So there's a new file called source config in Jenkins X3. So this is in the .jx gitops source config file. And this is basically a single simple config file that keeps track of all the different Git repositories you import into the cluster. So there's one or more groups Each group has an owner or an organization or a user in the Git provider. This one's for github.com, the provider github.com. The owner is my personal username. And then here's all the repositories that are going to be imported from that user. So if you want a quick way of importing lots of different projects, you can just create a pull request on this text file, and Jenkins X3 will automatically import all of those projects you mentioned in this file. So it's nice and easy to just use pure GitOps to import repositories now. We also have a couple of commands in the JX GitOps plugin, which helps export projects from other clusters. Let me show you this one, repository. Let me go here. This is the JX GitOps command line, and under repository, we have repository export. So there's this new command, JX GitOps repository export, which if you connect to a version 2 cluster, this will export all of the source repositories in that cluster and generate this file for you. So it's a way of connecting to an existing version 1 or version 2 Jenkins X installation, exporting all the source repositories, creating that one file, and then just checking that file into Git, and hey presto, you've imported all those source repositories into your new cluster. Now let me show you this pull request again. You see we're running a pipeline on this pull request. And let me look at the pull request one more time. So if you remember, the very first file it changed was that source config file, so this one. Now because the pull request pipeline has detected you've changed the source config, it's also generated the source repository custom resource in the config root namespaces JX folder. So we have a source repository resource that's going to be applied into Kubernetes. And it's also updated. You see these files here? These files are the Lighthouse configuration files. So it's also generated a pull request on the Lighthouse configuration files to add pre-submit and post-submit pipelines for this Git repository. So what we've basically done is automatically generate a whole bunch of resources in the pull request. And what's nice about this is you can just look at each pull request and see exactly what's actually going to happen. So these are all the actual changes to Kubernetes resources that are going to be applied when this pull request merges. So the very first commit, if we go back and look at the pull request, the very first commit was a fairly modest. It just added the dependency, YAML, and the source repository. Then another pull request, another commit has been generated, which generates all the other stuff. So the source repository, the Lighthouse config files, and those kind of things. So we get a kind of a double commit on each pull request. So fairly soon, this pull request should go green, and then it should merge. We can watch the pull request executing in the UI. So we can see we've got the pull request number 1 on the cluster Git repository. Currently in Jenkins X version 3, the very first input process is a little bit slow. We haven't quite optimized it for speed yet, so it can take kind of 5 minutes to do your very first import. Once you've imported in your repository, it's pretty quick from then on, but the very first import is a little bit slow. It ends up running the pipeline 3 times, which is suboptimal. It runs it the first time to do the code generation, it runs it a second time, and then the third time, it basically checks that nothing's changed since the last commit. So we can hopefully make this a little bit quicker soon. And you can see the import is finished. Here's the commands we can use at the command line to watch the pipeline running, the classic JX get activity. So we can watch the pipeline running on the command line. You'll also notice that the pipeline for this new quick start has started in Octant as well. So we can look at it in Octant and we can watch the pipeline flow here. So this new quick start is going to be built, the container image pushed to the container registry. It's then going to create a pull request on the cluster Git repository to deploy this quick start into the staging namespace. With Jenkins X3, we use a single Git repository to represent all of the local namespaces in the cluster. So we don't have a separate staging Git repository right now because staging by default is in the same cluster as dev. So we're going to use the same Git repository for dev and staging. So this pipeline will chug along and will promote to staging. While that's running, let's look at the repositories page. We'll see Now we have two repositories. We've got the cluster Git repository, and we've got this quick start. If I, let me close these other tabs a second. If I open this Git repository for this awesome quick start, I'm going to make a pull request. So I'm going to edit this file. I'm going to say awesome X, Jenkins awesome X, and I'm going to create a pull request. And propose a change and create a pull request. There we go, there's a pull request created. And you'll notice the chat ops has kicked in and the pipeline has started. If I go back to Octant and look at the pipelines page, we'll see there's a pull request started for the there's a pipeline started for the pull request, and in addition to the release pipeline that's running. We can filter out just the awesome node pipelines to make it a bit more simple. So we're running a pull request pipeline and a release pipeline at the same time. So we'll be able to see the effect of a pull request and the effect of a promoter staging very shortly. If we look at the pipeline for the promotion, you'll see we've created a pull request. And if I click on that pull request, here's the pull request to promote version 101 to the staging environment. If I look at the files changed, you can see the pull request changes the Helm file, and it's adding a new chart, the awesome node version 101. It's going to use the namespace JX staging. And because we've never used the local chart museum yet, it's going to add a new chart museum URL into the requirements file. So if I view this as a complete file, you'll see we have all the different repositories here, the Helm chart repositories. So we see we've added a new repository called dev, which has got our local chart museum. And towards the bottom of these chart releases, we'll see here's the new awesome node chart in the dev chart repository with 101. So you can see that we can have many different chart repositories here. Different teams can have their own chart repository, and you can deploy any chart from any repository in any namespace. If you didn't want this to be in the JX staging namespace, you could pick another namespace and put it somewhere else. So using a simple standard YAML file, the Helm file, we can deploy any kind of charts in any namespace in the cluster, and it's GitOps all the way. So this pipeline will continue. It's going to trigger a pipeline on, you see we've got a pipeline running on the, the pull request has triggered a pipeline on the cluster Git repository. And what's interesting about this pull request, if I look at the pull request, go back to the pull request, this one. So just like before, we have a fairly modest commit to start with, which just adds the new Helm file changes. There we go. And then we're going to get another commit on this pull request, which is going to add all of the actual resources that are included in that chart. So the deployment resource, the ingress resource, yeah, there we go. We've just generated another pull request, another commit to the pull request. And if we look in here, we'll see we've never used the JX staging namespace before, so there's a namespace resource being created. There's the deployment resource in the JX staging namespace for this app. This is the container image that's being used, 101, and the various readiness probes and liveness probes. This is the ingress that's being created. This is where the endpoint is going to be. And this is a release CRD that includes details about like what's the SHA, what was the commit, where's the Git URL, and those kind of things. So we can see from the Git pull request exactly what's actually going to happen in Kubernetes when we merge this. We don't have to do magic or mentally guess. We can see exactly what's actually going to be changed in Kubernetes. So it helps on your reviews. So once this pipeline goes green, it should merge, and then we'll have this application promoted to the staging namespace. Meanwhile, the pull request, the pipeline for the pull request on the preview has already completed, which is awesome. If we look at the pull request, let me close these other tabs. If I open the pull request, so this is a pull request I made on the awesome node app. We'll see we have the comment. The pull request is built and available in preview environment. That's the namespace, and here's the app. And if I click on the app, we'll see here's the running application with Hello Node Jenkins Awesome X. So there's the preview of the code before we've merged it, which is awesome. We can also go straight to the preview from Octant. If we click on this preview link and open that, it goes straight to the preview. So we can link to the preview, we can link to the repository, or we can link to the pull request, all from this handy little page. We also look at the logs of all these steps or the step definitions and stuff. Now if we go back, we should see promote to staging is chugging along. We're almost there, and we should have a release promoted to staging shortly. And as you can see, the promotion pipeline is finished, so we can switch into the JX staging namespace and look at the apps. If I look at the apps in dev, so we can see in the JX staging, we have Awesome Node deployed version 101. It's one pod running out of one. And if we click on this URL, we'll see there's the quick start running in the staging environment. So we've created a brand new cluster from scratch. We've imported the project, we've built it, released it to staging, and we've created a preview environment. Really cool. Thanks for watching.